Hi, it's Steve Albrecht, and welcome to the Library Service Safety and Security Podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Library 2.0 and produced by the founder of Library 2.0, Steve Hargadon. You can always get more information about Library 2.0 at library20.com. We've got a great new website for my book, thesafelibrary.com. That's www.thesafelibrary.com. Got some great free stuff there, including a handout which could be useful for your staff, talking about safety, security, and service, and also a nice video that we've done about the book that explains everything in a lot of detail. So take a look there. My topic for this half hour is something that has maybe never happened in your library or has happened frequently enough to be crazy making, or it's something that you're concerned about as you look at the landscape in terms of power blackouts and brownouts and water issues and flooding and things related to weather and issues that may come to your facility, which is a power loss. And we'll talk about power blackouts and what to do about power loss at the library in this episode today. So living in California, as I did for so many years, we had a lot of power blackouts at my home because of wind. And we had Santa Ana winds in San Diego, which would knock down the power lines. We also had fires on a pretty regular basis, wildfires, and we evacuated from our home in the East County mountains of San Diego about 4 times because of the fires, and each time we lost power. One time we were out of power after a fire for, I think, something like 11 days. So I had to go into San Diego proper and rent a generator, which I filled with gasoline every morning at 5 o'clock in the morning and every night at 5 p.m. And imagine how stressful that was, having already lived through a bunch of fire issues, pouring gasoline into a roasting hot generator every 12 hours. I did that for 11 straight days. You may have had power blackouts in your home, and it's kind of stressful. You have to break out the candles and the flashlights and hope that your phone is charged enough. If you have other folks in the house, kids and spouse, partner, family members, relatives, it can be stressful for them as well, including your pets. There's a sense sometimes in a power blackout that you say, well, is this a short time thing, 5-10 minutes, half an hour, or is this a day by day thing because there's some kind of substantial issue that's happened in our community? A transformer's blown up, something's happened to the software system, or some natural disaster or man-made disaster has created this. When we look at power blackouts in the organizations, some facilities, it might be a factory or some kind of larger entity like a police station or a fire station or a city hall, will have the luxury of a backup generator operated by diesel fuel, tested regularly by the facilities and maintenance people, tested regularly by the fire marshals to make sure it works okay, filled with enough diesel to operate for 24 hours or even 5-6 days in a row. That's the ultimate, and that's what we expect when we pay our taxes to entities in the city and county to keep themselves operational in the event of a significant power blackout. When you think about a power blackout at the library, there is a good chance that you do not have, unless your building is part of a plaza or is connected to a campus type of environment where you've got other city or county buildings to operate. The chances of you having a backup generator are pretty slim. I do site security surveys for libraries a lot, and I would say that I've seen them probably on an irregular basis. About 1 out of 10 libraries that I go to do I see a generator system. And clearly the issue as to why libraries don't have a power generator backup system is the cost. It's expensive. It's a substantial footprint in the back of the building. It requires diesel tanks. It requires maintenance and testing. It's not something the average maintenance person, janitorial person knows how to operate. It requires high voltage electricians, specialty people, and folks that have worked around that type of backup generator power system, especially in emergency situations and in awful weather and things like that, know how to do that stuff. So in a perfect world, those things click on and will provide power to your facility at perhaps a reduced level, but enough to perhaps keep the doors open if you have to use your facility as a shelter in weather situations, things like that, or at least enough to keep the power on to be able to operate the facility in kind of a skeleton crew kind of a way, which means that you could operate the burglar alarm, fire alarm systems, that you could keep electricity into certain parts of the building. So let's look at a power blackout from kind of an overall perspective and say, usually these situations do not have the benefit of advance warning. Now, when I came from in California and San Diego, they would have brownouts, which would be advertised. The power grid people would come on to social media and onto the news and say, because of really serious increased demands during significant hot weather or really, really cold weather, it did get cold in San Diego occasionally, they would say we're going to have a power brownout because there's just too much demand. And so people would know that they're going to lose power from some span of time to some span of time. My parents are still in San Diego, and this happens to them on an occasional basis, especially during the summer when it's really, really hot. But most of the time, you have no knowledge of the power blackout, and it just comes across as an event that surprises everybody. If it takes place during business hours when the sun is up, it's much more easy, certainly, to operate and get people out of the building and close down the library and check on all the staff and patrons, make sure nobody's in a hiding spot or trapped somewhere. But if it happens in the evening hours at the library, say 7 o'clock at night when the sun is down, then it's substantially more difficult, even more dangerous to move people. We have slip and fall issues. We have staircase issues, stairwells. We have no exterior lighting sometimes. We have elevators that can get stuck, things like that. So we'll talk a little bit about the possibilities here. The other part of the power blackout is it's just a tremendous hassle when you think of all the things that when they reboot back up, burglar alarm systems, fire alarm systems, your Wi-Fi, your network systems, your emergency lighting perhaps, things like that. When they boot back up, it's a tremendous strain on the electrical system. So you can have lots of problems with surging and things related to damage to the overall electrical system when things go from fully on to fully off and then fully back on again. I would think that even in daytime hours, it can be scary for little kids and for maybe the elderly, people that suddenly find themselves, plunged into darkness even during the daylight. If you have the type of library where you've got a lot of natural light and the design of it is vaulted ceilings and archways and things where there's a lot of open light, it's much more easier to function. But we still have to think about how do we evacuate people safely and successfully? How do we get people out of the library in using maybe small groups that are walked by staff? Staff has access to emergency flashlights, or they can use their phones as flashlights. Sometimes they're pretty powerful for the iPhone. But it's really kind of a fear issue for people that aren't anticipating that type of thing, especially happening, in the evening time. We want to get them out of the facility. So I worry is from kind of a technological standpoint about all the rebooting of the various systems that are in your facility. And, if we had a notice as to when the power would go back on, we could come and maybe shut off some of the primary breakers. The breaker panels where we have significant chunks of the building are being operated by very large breakers, but that's not something that most people, including me, know how to do. I know how to do it in the panel in my house, but not in a large building or a multi-story building or a building with a basement or a building with a huge electrical panel. If you have access to maintenance personnel, if you have access to public works personnel, if you have access to people that are skilled and trained in certain electricians, journeyman electrician skills, then they may be able to give you advice prior to a blackout and talking to them and saying, take a look at our panel. Can you give us some advice about what things we might need to throw in terms of a breaker and then turn it back on again, if anything, if that's even possible or necessary. There may be some smaller breaker panels that are in your rooms that you can use to shut down certain things and then power those back on when it's safe to do so. But again, I'm not suggesting that you take a flashlight down into the basement and figure out what these switches are all about. But you may have some people in your orbit in the library who are public works, maintenance, facilities people that are quite skilled and knowledgeable about these things, may be able to provide you some information about what goes on and what comes back, turns off, and then what comes back on in what order, things like that. So these master panels for these electrical systems are quite significant. Think about the things that operate our chillers and our air conditioning systems. The electrical panels for those are enormous. And again, we could be talking about high voltage systems, which take a very specific type of electrician, very specific type of training to operate. So when in doubt, get help from qualified, skilled, licensed people that know how to do that stuff. Don't look it up on YouTube and try to figure out what to do. So I always turn to my facilities directors, my facility managers, the forepersons that work in those functions and may have really good knowledge about your building because they helped build it or they were there when it was being built. People in public works who are specialists in certain types of electricians, master electricians and high voltage electricians, things like that. Fire marshal, maybe somebody that you could get some advice from to say, could you look at our building and our panel and talk about maybe perhaps labeling some of the panels that we could operate if we had to as a library staff or library facilities people, that we make sure we're doing it safely. The other challenge with power blackouts, daytime or nighttime, is this is when we discover we don't have enough flashlights. I think about this in my own house. I probably have 3 really nice expensive flashlights there's one in our garage and breezeway room so we can help the cats find their way around in the dark. There's one inside the house and another one inside another part of the house. So we have at least 3 really good flashlights that are charged up all the time and stay in their chargers and can be used in these situations. Oftentimes what I've seen in doing site security surveys of the library, we will find flashlights, but they don't work. The batteries haven't worked since the Reagan administration. Nobody's bothered to change them. They're sitting in a charger perhaps over a telephone or by some evacuation map in some hallway, and then they don't work. The other thing I have found, besides the flashlights don't always work, is that the emergency lighting system has not been tested and doesn't work either. And there may be pockets where it's the batteries have not worked correctly, and there may be areas where you just need to do a test of the emergency lights and say, what is it that we're needing to have on and operational, so make sure that when in fact our emergency lights come on, they all do at all levels, different stairways, exits, things like that in the library. The other part, which I don't always know the answer to, is that if you have escalators in your library, that means a power blackout usually means they stop functioning. If you have elevators in your library, there's a couple things that happen. I'm no expert on elevators, but I've been told a couple things happen. Sometimes, depending on the age and the type of elevator, it may freeze between floors with no power. There may be a small backup power generator, backup battery system for the elevator, which will take it to either the bottom floor or the which is most likely, or a floor where it can be opened, where it's not stuck between floors. It's not stuck at the very top or the very bottom. It can still be operational, and there may be a lighting system inside there, and the phone system will still work for people that are in the elevator as well. So if these concerns, if your building has these concerns, elevators and escalators, get some information, call the vendors, call the maintenance and repair people for those specific devices and say, hey, let me run a worst case scenario by you. Tell me what we need to do with our elevators or escalators in the event of a power blackout. This is really also about teaching staff not to be fearful in the dark, and it can be a little bit chaotic, especially when people, patrons and maybe even staff members want to bolt for the exit in their desire to get outside or to be out of the building if they are fearful inside the building because there's no lights anywhere. We certainly have issues about carpeting and hardwood floors and tile floors and staircases and lots of slip and fall opportunities, lots of opportunities for people to fall down substantial distances, staircases, escalators, things like that. So when you think of this, your facility, what's the flooring look like? Is it change from carpet to tile to carpet to tile to hardwood to other kinds of surfaces in a very short period? Is it possible that your staircases don't have very good lighting in general, and with no power they have no lighting at all? So we want to make sure that we keep doors closed, that are stairway doors and things, and locked if we can, certainly not in a fire situation, but so that people don't open them and fall down the stairs. So staff may need to be positioned in front of staircases and stairways up or down, to make sure people don't injure themselves when they are leaving. And as we know that, under stress, people tend to trample on each other. People tend to trample on the folks trying to get out, and there's a sense of panic sometimes which can come in and cause significant issues as people evacuate. We want to make sure that staff is in position to have lights and flashlights and even at a bare minimum their own phones, and ask people to use their phones to light up the way. If you've been to a Taylor Swift concert, you can know how much power we can get from lots of cell phones all lit up at once, and so that may be an alternative which could be useful as well. So the evacuation discussion may be one way to do it as part of a drill, and you know that based on my experience in the world, especially around crises and emergencies, I'm always suggesting drills, that we do a power blackout drill once a year to say, okay, we've armed staff before the library opens, we've armed staff with flashlights, and we have them in strategic locations at entrances and staircases and things like that, escalators, so we make sure that folks know where to position themselves in the event of a power blackout, and they grab the nearest working, charged up, ready to go flashlight, and they get into position to be able to escort or prevent patrons from going in places where they could injure themselves. Related to a lot of that, if we go back to my security hat for a second, is I have significant concerns sometimes about the locking systems for doors. I've seen all kinds of goofy things that happen. In some power blackout situations, if you have electronic doors, they will open, and all of them in the whole building. And I've seen that, and it's kind of weird. Every exit door that's managed by an electronic lock will open up so that people can evacuate through that way. That's maybe okay in terms of a rapid evacuation, but it's hard to know who's going where and who's coming in or leaving, and whether people are going out of places that you can't pay attention to because you don't have enough staff. So when I look at pre-programmed locking and unlocking electronic doors that are on some kind of system, I used to work in a building where at like 6 p.m., the doors would automatically lock. And so if you were outside and had to go back in, you were stuck until the next day because you didn't have, the master key to get back inside. If you're inside the building and there's a power blackout, sometimes these locks would just unlock. And this is not great. And I have seen this happen in library security situations where the power goes off at 2 o'clock in the morning and the building unlocks. And so suddenly it takes a while for it to reboot and relock the system. All the doors in the library are unlocked at 2 in the morning. So find out from your door vendors, find out from your maintenance and your public works or facilities people what the deal is if we have door locks which are electronically operated versus ones that we use some kind of key system. So in the building that I'm in, we have a fob system, a way that you just wave the proximity fob in front of the door and it opens. Well, in no power, those things don't work. And so this means that you need to think about who in your facility you've entrusted the keys to, library supervisors, managers, department directors, things like that we have keys to be able to lock the facility doors once everybody is outside, once we know we're not going back inside the facility and it's been cleared, or we have ways to unlock the facility so that we can get back in if we have to, even when the power is out, to be able to check on things or to look at some of the electrical panels or things like that. So you want to be able to get back in the facility. So I have seen situations happen when you have locking doors that you get yourself trapped outside unless somebody has a master key. That could be someone who's on vacation or 20 miles away from the building. So make sure that we know that the hard keys exist and who has those and who can operate those things in darkness to get back inside the facility or lock the facility as necessary. Kind of similar to that, we have seen in some door issues where you have an emergency alarm over the door, which is like a breaker bar or a panic button bar, which people push on and it sets off an alarm. And that's done to notify staff that people are leaving through an unauthorized area. Those things will either arm themselves and go off or stop working altogether. So I have a lot of qualms and concerns about the electronic systems that we use to lock the building or unlock the building. I've seen situations where staff comes into a building which is automatically unlocked, not necessarily at libraries, but I've seen this at city halls. The building unlocks automatically at 7 o'clock in the morning, and that's great. So you don't have to use your key, but sometimes people come in and find trespassers and other folks in their building before they get there because they realize the place opens at 7, but the staff doesn't come in until 7:30. So just like the electrical panels, just like the elevators and the escalators, get some guidance and help from those door vendors and say, what's the worst case scenario in a power blackout for these doors? Do they open? Do they close? Do they lock? Do they unlock? Do we need to use hard keys? Which hard keys are operational? Is there an emergency battery system in some of these door lock scenarios that we can open the door and unlock it or not? And when you think about all these things, it's certainly easy to say this could never happen and I know what to do in this building. All I'm saying is just test those theories and make sure you're correct, because under stress, we go back to how we have been trained. If we haven't thought about this stuff, it can be complicated and sometimes quite stressful to figure out, how do I secure this building or how do I get into this building? Either way. When we have a power blackout that involves nighttime and people leave their stuff inside the library and evacuate, that can be quite complex, because some people will leave their purses, backpacks, wallets, whatever inside the library and some will not. And then we have issues about how we secure the building. How do we let people back in there? It's very complicated. So my advice for these situations is that people are out. When they go out, you tell people in an announcement, whether it's bullhorn, megaphone, loud floor warden, staff conversations. Say, take all your stuff, take all your valuables with you. Don't leave anything. Leave books and DVDs and things that you're working on that are library materials, they're part of the collection. But take purses, backpacks, cell phones, wallets. And make sure people have their kids and their kids' stuff and things like that, and that they don't leave them inside the library, because there could be a substantial time between when the power goes off and when the power goes back on. So all these things are part of a general discussion which you could have with your facilities maintenance, even IT people, your IT supervisors, managers, directors, vendors, and you can have the same conversation with the fire marshal to say, worst case scenario, what are we doing here with a power blackout? In power blackouts where there is significant weather outside, wind and rains typically, we want to make sure people are safe if they're waiting outside or staging outside, that they're staging in safe locations, not standing out by the flagpole where they could get struck by lightning, but staging in safe locations near the building where it's safe to do so, and sheltering in place in the safest way possible outside the building. If it's nighttime and people have access to get to their cars to leave, don't forget that the emergency lights may not come on for the parking lot lights, and it could be pitch black in the parking lot, especially if you have those of you that have parking garages next to your building. There could be no lights in there as well. And it can be very difficult and even dangerous for people to navigate stairs and stairwells to get to a parking structure next to the library to get into their cars to drive away. So all these things need to be carefully considered. The issue about liability for us is, does our liability to our patrons end as soon as they walk out of the door? And the plaintiff's attorneys would say, well, you have a duty of care for them until they're safely in their cars. I'm not a lawyer, but how that stuff goes. So I think about the possibilities of darkness all the way around the building, in parking garage, parking lots, which is, again, why we would really benefit from backup power systems if they're affordable, and emergency lights that work on a short time basis, parking lots, things like that, hallways, stairways, outside the building, exterior emergency lights that can help people get to safety. So I've given you a lot to think about in these situations, a lot to consider. It's not a you issue, it's an us issue. Can you get some advice from IT, facilities, public works? Can you get some advice from your fire marshal? Is there a noted electrician in your area that you can talk to that's connected to your facilities and knows your facilities? Can you speak to your elevator and escalator vendors? Can you speak to your door control vendors and say, hey, let me run some scenarios by you and tell me what we're going to do in these things, so you feel better about the entire situation? So power blackout at the library, not fun, need to be prepared for it. So my thanks to the producer of the Library Service Safety and Security Podcast, Steve Hargadon. For more information, visit library20.com. Until next time, I'm Steve Albrecht, and thanks for listening to the Library Service Safety and Security Podcast.